Shivani, oh, okay, it started recording. So. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, hi everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. It means a lot to me and I'm happy to see some familiar faces here. So thank you, Shivani, for inviting me to speak at this event. It means a lot to me and it holds a very special place in my heart. So I'm very excited to be here. Yeah. So let's start off with the land acknowledgement first. I would like to acknowledge that I'm a settler on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Halkamilam speaking Musqueam, Stalo, Chemainus, Kwantlen, and Tawasan peoples. It is very important to recognize the land that we reside on. We express full heart gratitude to and uphold the sovereignty of these nations as guests and settlers on the land. I understand my ongoing contribution to the settler colonial project and will continue to work to dismantle the oppressive systems we live within. I implore you all to find out whose land you live, learn, and work on. You can use websites like nativeland.ca to get started. So here's a little introduction. Who am I? So my name is Kennice Wong, and I'm a young Chinese Canadian woman, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm passionate about making everyone feel loved, included, and empowered. I thoroughly enjoy forming connections with a wide variety of people in my community, and I strongly value empathy and find joy in aiming to make a positive impact in the lives of the people around me. And I'm extremely grateful to be inspired by so many remarkable people like you all every single day. So here's our agenda for this event. I would just like to start off with a content warning. I know this is in the event description, but this presentation will explore sensitive topics, including sexual assault, rape culture, and misogyny. Please do not hesitate to exit the meeting if you feel triggered at any time. I will not be diving in too deep, but I still will be touching on these topics. So I know if you all feel emotionally triggered, then it's totally okay to take a break. I'm talking about what is locker room talk? What does this term mean and what does it sound like? Then we're going to be watching a short video that explains why this happens and why it's important to take action against it and how this just becomes normalized. And finally, we're going to go into action items. So what can we do to help? And also how can situations like these be prevented? And then we're going to have a conclusion. So we're going to have a short final thoughts session and yeah, other comments. This is a quote from the Canadian Women Organization. Sexual assault and harassment are persistent forms of gender-based violence that are rooted in gender inequality. During this presentation, the term misogyny affected people will be used, and this term includes gender expanding people or femme-presenting individuals who may not identify as women, and they still endure gender-based systemic oppression. It is important to recognize that cisgender men hold immense gender-based privilege in society. Just to clarify for those who aren't familiar with this term, cisgender means that someone aligns with the gender that they were assigned at birth. For example, I am cisgender. I was assigned female at birth and I'm a woman. So that means I have the societal privilege of a cisgender individual. What does locker room talk mean? So yeah, some examples can be found in the History Workshop UK article, Locker Room Talk, Men Discussing Women in the Middle Ages and Now by Rachel Moss. The term locker room talk is described as men's discourse that specifically includes vulgar and coarse language. She says, locker room talk is thus talk which can be expected to be communicated between members and which is not open to those outside the group. We might expect that such talk would reflect the values and priorities of the group in a setting where the members feel safe to express opinions without the concern of being overheard. So some examples of this can include guys bragging about the number of girls they've had sex with or sexual relations with, talking about women's bodies in a way that sexually objectifies them, or boasting about how they've had like non-consensual interactions with their partners, and other examples. This quote reads, "Rape culture doesn't necessarily mean that we as a society condone the act of rape or think that it's good. What rape culture does mean is that we normalize rape and that we make excuses for it. We blame rape survivors for their own victimization, and we tell women that because they didn't behave or dress in a certain way, that it's their own fault for being sexually assaulted. So now that I've kind of introduced and brought up these topics, Shivani is going to lead a short discussion following these prompts and just this topic in general. So yeah, Shivani, take it away.
Yeah, guys, so our first discussion question for today is asking if locker room talk is only restricted to locker rooms or does it go beyond that, and how so? And our second question is going to be, is locker room talk a part of rape culture and how so? So you guys can feel free to answer any one of these questions. If you're comfortable, just turn your mic on, and if not, you can just chat, type your answer in the chat.
Shivani, how would you answer these questions? You're on mute, by the way.
My bad. I was saying how locker room talk does definitely go beyond locker rooms, because a lot of this, especially in like my community, it's held in households and any other corner where a group of men hang out and they talk about misogyny, sexism, and really predatory sexualized behavior towards women. And locker room is definitely part of rape culture. If you guys know, there's a rape culture pyramid, if you ever looked at it. And rape culture is put right at the bottom of how things like kind of lead to rape and sexual assault. And men do definitely engage in this locker room conversation by, again, misogyny and sexist comments. Although if you've ever seen the rape pyramid image that I'm talking about, you'll know that I would personally move a few things around, and the locker room talk would preferably be in the middle of the pyramid.
Nicole said in the chat, I think locker room talk goes beyond because it's almost like that mob mentality. This type of sexist talk is so common in online spaces too. Yeah, I think social media is super dangerous because it's just like anyone can say anything, which is a good thing, but it also like opens up that kind of space for people to like express their bigotry without being like directly confronted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have anything to add? Okay. If you have something else, just text it in the chat or bring it up later. So now we're going to watch a TED Talk that explores this topic from a unique perspective. The speaker is Alexis Jones. And here, I'm just going to.
Is that I've spent the past 3 years in college locker rooms having conversations with young men about the importance of respecting women. I was recently invited to a major university, and as I was being debriefed on the way in, they were telling me what was going on specific to their locker room. I was informed that there was one player who had punched his baby mama, that there were 4 other players that were facing rape allegations with 4 separate women, that there was another 2 players who had filmed and watched one of the rapes of an unconscious girl. And knowing all of this, one of the head coaches came in the day after the election and he started the chant, "We can grab women by the pussy because this is America." Well, that is not the America that I know. And the truth is that sexual assault is but a symptom of the problem. The problem is the mindset of how these young men are being programmed to think about, to talk about, and to treat women. Now, before I dive into the whole talk, I feel like I have to preface with a few disclaimers. One, I'm absolutely going to mess up. I just accepted that that's going to happen, and I'm probably going to blank out at some point, so please be gentle with me. On top of it, there are brilliant people who've dedicated their entire lives to this conversation, and institutions who have paved the way, so I am but offering my humble 2 cents. Number 2, protect her is but a starting place for us. We recognize that men are also sexually assaulted, 1 in 16. We know that the LGBT community is also assaulted, and while those communities absolutely deserve our attention, For the sake of this conversation, I am going to be speaking about her, because violence against women is a house on fire, and I will be speaking in heterosexual stereotypes. Number 3, protect her is not implying that women are weak and that we can't protect ourselves, so we need men to come and help protect us. Protect her is an invitation for all of humanity to better prioritize the women and girls. Now, what's interesting is that some schools call me because, at the end of the day, they care about what's going on in their locker rooms. But before I ever started in locker rooms, I worked in girl empowerment for a decade. When I was 19 years old, I founded a nonprofit called I Am That Girl. We're basically a badass version of Girl Scouts for college girls. We have about 1 million girls involved now, and we just opened up a chapter in our 20th country. So the truth is, thank you, man. I dig that. So the truth is that I have a name and a face and a story for every time someone talks about girls in statistic form. And it wasn't until 3 years ago that Yogi Roth and Trent Dilfer called me, and they asked me to come and give a talk to the top 18 high school quarterbacks for a TV show called Elite 11. What I didn't realize was that when it aired on ESPN, a week later, Everything with Ray Rice would come out. And suddenly I was that girl in the locker room having tough love conversations with men about the importance of respecting women. Now, it probably helped that I worked at Fox Sports and ESPN, and that I grew up in Texas where football is a religion, that I grew up with 4 older brothers. My father is the very best man that I know. My husband was a professional athlete for 9 years. And what's interesting is all of a sudden being hired by Division I countries all over the country, that I was invited behind the velvet curtain to better understand what was going on with them. Like I said, there were some schools who were hiring me because they had an incident going on in their locker rooms, and there were other schools who were just legitimately concerned. And I had one head coach call me, and he said he was worried because he had a daughter, and the way in which these young men were talking about women, that was so disrespectful. So sure enough, I fly out, and I'm sitting there, and halfway through my talk, we're sitting in a circle in the locker room, you can imagine, the only girl, and halfway through my talk, one of the guys raises his hand, and he says, I get it, it's important to respect chicks, but it's cool to fuck chicks. And you can imagine, coach is like, you gotta be kidding me. He's like sitting there shaking his head, looking down at the ground. And so I look up at this kid and I said, okay, says who? Now it's this long pause, and immediately he's, looking at his boys left and right who are equally mortified, staring down at the ground like, you gotta be kidding me. We're for sure running sprints now. And so after a minute of awkward silence goes by, I look up and I said, here's the thing, I'm not necessarily disagreeing. I'm just saying you made a really opinionated statement. You said it's cool to fuck girls. I'm just saying, says who? And finally he looks up at me and he says, I don't know. And I said, yeah, that's the problem, you see, is that you're on autopilot and you've been programmed to think that way. That you were handed a script that someone gave you with a definition of cool that's not even yours, and you have the audacity to pawn it off as though you're being original. Mother, father, preacher, teacher, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. I am simply inviting you to be brave enough to author your own life, to come up with your own definitions, and to think for yourself. He came up to me after the talk and gave me a really awkward hug. And he said, thank you. And I looked at him and I said, for what? And he said, no one has ever asked me to think for myself. I want to thank you for the invitation. Now, I have 1,000 stories of adventures being the only girl in the locker room. And I have stories that would make you laugh, and they would make you cry, and they would make you cringe, and they would break your heart. But more than anything else, they would leave you hopeful. You see, I was put on the planet to empower women. I was made known of that at a really young age, but it wasn't until I stood in a room full of alpha dudes that I realized that I'd been missing the point, only preaching to half the sky. That violence against women is not a women's issue, although we are incredibly capable creatures. Violence against women is a human issue, and it requires all of us participating. And the truth is, the majority of these young men feel that they have never been invited to sit at our table. And because I'm not Santa, and I can't fly to every single school, although Lord knows I have tried. I have spent 220 days on the year, 220 days a year on the road for the past 3 years. So we created the first ever protector program that can be integrated into college locker rooms to invite young men to broaden their definition of manhood. Because we believe that in order to protect the dorm rooms, that we have to activate the hearts and the minds of the locker rooms. Now, a few things that I've learned being in the trenches with these guys is, first and foremost, we have to make them aware of their programming. We have to get the most distracted generation in history to pause long enough to be introspective, to ask the hard questions, says who? We know that they consume 10 hours of media a day. Media that glorifies violence against women, that's inherently disrespectful, that's hypersexualizing and objectifying. We know that they consume 3,000 brand images every day, spoon-feeding them a definition of manhood that's been hijacked by a cheap clone-wearing Ken doll, lacking a moral constitution, self-respect, and authentic confidence. We know that the majority of these young men learn about sex through porn. So maybe we can stop being so shocked, because they're doing exactly what we as a society are programming them to do, and they're doing it very well. So maybe as a society, we can better educate them on sex and healthy relationships. 2, we have to have a conversation about identity. We have to broaden their definition of manhood, because the consensus in the locker room right now is very easy and pretty achievable. It's be as rich as you can, be as famous as you can, and bang as many girls as you can. Now, it was interesting because my husband had a brilliant idea. He said, what we have to do, and my husband is here, he's a 6'9" poster boy of feminism. And his brilliant suggestion was, we have to get these young men to stop viewing women just as sexual objects, but to remind them that women are human beings too. He said, so honestly, if I were you, I would just pull pictures of their girlfriends and sisters and moms from social media. I put it in your presentation. That's my husband voice, by the way. And so it was this brilliant idea. So for the first talk that I ever gave for Elite 11, I pulled pictures of all the women that they love, and I put up a slide, and it says 1 in 4 girls would be sexually assaulted on a college campus, and of course their eyes glaze over, and they're like, here we go, we're gonna have this conversation. And then I clicked the next slide, and I said, but it's different when it's her. And I memorized 10 to 15 names, and I said, it's different when it's Sarah, and when it's Lauren, and when it's Jenny, and now these guys are looking at their 16-year-old sister. Half the guys in the room started crying. We have to reframe this issue to make it supremely personal to them. Number 3, we have to have a conversation about respect. You can't give something that you don't have. We have to imbue these young men with more self-respect so that they're able to treat others with more dignity. What dawned on me was that we are not teaching enough emotional education in school right now. We're certainly not teaching these young men how to create an authentic confidence, so they are sourcing it from exactly where they know how, through performance, through popularity, and through possessions. We have to broaden a definition of confidence that is not contingent on social media highlight reels and external validation. 4th, we have to have real talk with these guys. I have yet to come into a locker room where they use words like consent and bystander. Those are words that we use, right, in our shiny, star-studded PSAs. I have yet to hear of a guy come in and raise his hand and be like, yeah, there's this really great opportunity for us bystanders to intervene. I've never heard of a guy be like, yo, we were in the middle of hooking up, and I'm not gonna lie, I paused and I was like, I just wanna make sure that I officially have your consent moving forward. And that's not me poking fun at the intention behind these words. That's just that we have to give them real language and real tools for the moments that we're asking them to be brave. We have to work with them and be in conversation with them to offer them language when they see something sketchy, being able to say, yo, we don't do that. Then in the middle of hooking up, to give them language like, yo, I just want to make sure you're cool with us having sex. Because as long as we're talking to them like academic robots, I think we're setting them up to fail. And as far as a few calls to action, anyone in media, please stop crucifying coaches in universities when this stuff happens in their locker room. We're at pandemic levels. This is happening everywhere. Instead, just celebrate the universities who are doing it right so we can inspire others to follow suit. For coaches and educators, please invest in programs like these that are preventative medicine. We cannot continue to triage these symptoms, putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. For parents out there, you hold all the power in your wallets. Demand that in order for you to pay tuition, the schools have to invest in the safety of both your daughters and your sons. For students out there, ask your administration to invest in these kind of programs. And for student athletes out there, say that you're not going to sign with any university that isn't making prevention a priority. For policymakers out there, if you have to have a driver's license to drive a car, why would you not have to take a mandatory sexual assault prevention program in order to attend a college or play a sport? For the National League team owners, would you be so audacious as to sign a protector pledge that says that you won't draft any students who have sexual assault convictions? To be a professional athlete is a privilege. It's a real-life superhero in this country. And you literally have the ability to change the entire game with those kind of standards. Lastly, protector is a battle cry. It's a belief system. It is a cultural identity that is rooted in the inherent respect for women. Right now, as we sit in this auditorium, we have women and badass men all over the country marching, standing at their capital, saying that this is the shift. Saying that this is the shift that our country wants to make. And it's easy for us to sit in an auditorium, and it's easy for us to hear these different talks and to be inspired by them. But the truth is, this kind of audacious shift in culture is going to demand that the warrior, that the gladiator, that the protector in you and in me rises to the occasion to create a new definition of normal, where girls and women and all people are treated with dignity and respect. Because the truth is that men are not simply the problem when it comes to violence against women. They're also the cure. And we have never needed them so much. So for the real men out there, consider this your invitation. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you all for listening. I hope that provided you with some more insight. So as we just watched, this video does a fantastic job at explaining how important it is to include men in our conversations and for them to practice active allyship. Their voices, especially men in power, hold a great potency and have the power to influence tremendous groups of people. However, here's a situation in which a well-known public figure's platform was used to reinforce sexist views. Years ago, a tape of Donald Trump was leaked, and in this video, we can hear him speaking about women in a dehumanizing way. It is incredibly disturbing to come to the realization that people, specifically cisgender and heterosexual men, may turn to him for guidance and follow his actions. Trump tries to justify his actions by saying, quote, "This is locker room talk," unquote, which implies that this is a normal part of manhood. But the dangers of hearing messages like "boys will be boys" and "this is locker room talk" is that there's no accountability for the actions of men and how they harm misogyny affected people. So now we're going to move on to our second discussion break. So Shivani, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, of course. So I have another discussion questions. The third one is, does misogyny contribute to locker room talk? If so, how? And is locker room talk just the beginning of how men participate in sexist behavior? If not, where else are these attitudes learned? So personally for me, again, misogyny does contribute to locker room talk because that's where men gather in any room, not just locker rooms, and they bash on women, sexualize women, talk about ways that they can, again, grab them by the pussy, and just like what Kennice showed previously about Donald Trump and his locker room talk example. And is locker room talk just the beginning of how men participate in sexual behavior? It is. But these attitudes are obviously learned elsewhere. Again, it's not just restricted to locker rooms, it's restricted to their socioeconomic factors and the household they grew up in, and the environment that they spend the most in. So if anyone else has to comment on these two questions, you can just, again, turn your mic on, or you can just type it in the chat.
Yeah, for sure. I think locker room talk is a symptom of kind of like the foundation of like the systemic oppression that misogyny affected people face, and like that just like allows locker room talk to happen and for like these conversations to be normalized. And like we don't always hear like people call out this type of behavior, even though we may not like condone it, but people just are so used to hearing it, and that should not be the case at all, because it like personally it makes me extremely uncomfortable, and like it doesn't make people feel safe. I think men learn locker room talk from the people they're surrounded with. Yeah, for sure. I think misogyny contributes to locker room talk because they don't respect the women they're talking about, or else they wouldn't say those things. Exactly. Like I think a lot of men respect women they're attracted to, and like for other women they just like say misogynistic things, or they just like pick and choose like where to show their respect, which is, if you don't respect all women, then you don't respect women. That includes people like in marginalized groups like the LGBTQ plus community, disabled community, and just like everyone in general. Like you can't just pick and choose. Just because you're attracted to someone doesn't mean that you're a respectful man or just a person in general.
Yes, when you see those hashtags on social media, how a lot of women talk about like men are trash and men are garbage, and there's those men who hop on and say, well, not me, because I respect my mom and I respect my sisters or my daughter, my girlfriend. It doesn't just apply to that. It means like to all marginalized and vulnerable women who are discriminated and oppressed in this patriarchal system.
Mm-hmm. And just because you like know women or like have women in your life, that doesn't mean that you're a good man.
Yeah.
Like it's the way you treat people, and like the way you interact with people, and the way you use your voice and use your power and use your platform for good, not just like, oh, I have a mom. Like, okay. It doesn't show how you are practicing active allyship. I'm gonna check the chat. Yeah, or how they switch up so fast compared to when they're with their friends. Yeah, for sure. I think like if the people around them are acting a certain way, then it like gives them an excuse to do that. And even if they may not like fully agree with that behavior, they still do it to conform to like the society's expectations. Does anyone else have something to add? I think it's even harder for boys and men with who don't have female siblings or not close to their mothers, for sure.
Yeah.
Because then they don't have that personal connection to it, and they may not always have like friends who are girls or whoever, misogyny affected people. Thank you for your contributions, everyone, to this discussion. Yeah, and they don't know what's right or what's wrong, for sure, because they don't really have their own like moral compass, because it's just what society's been like pushing onto people for so long. Thank you for your discussion. Okay. So as I mentioned before, here's some reasons why these comments are harmful and why they matter. Misogynistic comments like the ones mentioned in the previous slide uphold the patriarchal system that is already entrenched in society. Furthermore, sexual objectification of women's bodies appears in numerous other forms, for example, the typical dress code policies, and oftentimes cisgender and heterosexual men speak about women's bodies as if they're pieces of property that belong to them, which is one of the most prevalent narratives in rape culture. This limits women to their physical appearances and devalues their achievements, knowledge, and humanity. This also leads society to view gay men as less of men and gay women as less of women, because society defines people's identities by their heteronormative connections. In reality, being a woman who is not attracted to men does not take away from a woman's gender identity, even though society has conditioned people to believe so. And if sexist comments continue to be tolerated and are not immediately addressed, casual misogyny becomes normalized. We all need to put in the work to actively fight against the heteropatriarchy. This is a statistic that I found on the Canadian Women's Foundation website. And I think this is really unique because it doesn't necessarily show numbers of cases, but it represents how prevalent this topic is and how much it shows up in the lives of misogyny-affected people. 80% of Canadians believe the next generation of women is just as or more likely to experience sexual assault. This is extremely terrifying to even begin to think about, and no one should have to live with this fear. And obviously, groups of misogyny-affected people think and are worried about this and think about this topic a lot, but men have the privilege, specifically cisgender heterosexual men have the privilege of to just brush it off, even though they actively contribute to this cycle. To continue the answer to the question, why are these comments harmful and why they matter? Here's some pieces of text from an article on the website Psychology Today. This article talks about the power of language and how we subconsciously begin to absorb and internalize views when we constantly hear words continue to be used in certain contexts repeatedly. So these include things like boys will be boys, this is just talk, locker room talk, it's no big deal. But this article says that words are among the basic building blocks of how we create our reality. When men speak about women using locker room talk, men are priming themselves to think of women as sex objects they can grab and to whom they can do anything. Even if men don't consciously think they have less respect for women, as a result of engaging in or hearing these kinds of conversations, below the level of awareness, their brains are making associations. And here are the final discussion prompts for this event. Shivani?
Yeah. So in regards to these questions, is locker room talk only limited to men, or do women partake in locker room talk as well? And are there women out there who justify these actions and defend men? Why do you think that is? Of course, it's not limited to men. Women do partake in locker room talk as well. We just might not be aware of it just because of our environment that we are in our society that we live in. And are there women out there who justify these actions and defend men? There are a lot of new talks recently about how, it's always believe women until it's the abuser who these people know, and then it's all of a sudden that all women are liars. And recently on Twitter, there's been this trend that this new feminist culture isn't it just because there are more women who are speaking out about rape and sexual assault, and typically people who are friends with the abusers, the rapists, they just don't think that their friend is capable of abusing someone just because they know them well. But we also have to be aware that abusers are not one-dimensional, and just because we know the abuser personally does not mean that they're not capable of hurting someone else.
For sure, and I think this is definitely part of the problem, because when we think of someone who may commit acts like this, we think of a certain type of person, but we don't realize that because of what's been normalized in our society and what we've been exposed to, a lot of men or just people in general begin to think a certain way, and that leads their actions to do something. And even if they seem like a nice person, quote unquote, that doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing this.
Yeah.
And for the, do you think there are women who justify these actions and defend men? I think there are, and I've definitely heard it. I think it's because of how we've been conditioned to grow up and just idolize men, and not that men shouldn't be idolized, but we just defend them all the time because of internalized misogyny, especially, and just like viewing them as superior. Okay, I'm gonna check the chat and read some of your responses. Okay, women definitely take part. I immediately think of Antia in the Langer Hall at Gurdwara. It's interesting that you can make that connection to experiences that you've had or that you've seen. I think some women defend men because they thought they were different and they wanted to think the best, not the worst of them. Oh my, that is so true.
Yeah.
That is true. Because you don't want to believe it, right? You're like, oh, they wouldn't do that. But like in reality, you don't understand that, like, how extreme it is. Or they know them in a different way, right? Right. For the second question, I think some women, such as mothers or sisters, might defend their brother and son because they know they'll never do that. I think this connects to Kennice's previous point in which men may say they respect the women in their family or women they're attracted to.
Yeah.
For sure. Definitely what Shivani talked about before. I think some women defend these actions because they've been conditioned to think that that's just what men do. Right. So they can let it slide because they've always heard that's how it's always been. For example, boys will be boys, right? There's no accountability, and it just like makes excuses for people who just express bigotry and like misogyny. I think women take part in locker room talk because, yeah, sometimes not knowing it. Some women justify these actions because they're fearful for what will happen to them if they stand up for themselves. For sure. It's super hard, right? Because in the situations, you always want to prioritize your own safety, because if you don't have safety, then you can't continue to take action and to fight the system. So yeah, it's super hard like talking about this topic when you're in the category of people that is in danger and like that is directly impacted. Women grow up learning the same things men do, and many don't realize or accept that they're contributing to their own oppression. Oh my goodness. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think it's just like, in my English class, actually, we have this prompt for our essay that says, how does someone's ignorance contribute to their own political or social oppression? And I think that's definitely what is being like connected to in the chat, because you just assume like, oh, I'm a woman, so of course I respect myself, but that doesn't mean that you don't internalize like messages that society has taught you, even if you don't want to, like, even if you may not be like actively trying to like absorb these messages, but you just like, we've been conditioned to think a certain way. So thank you everyone for your messages in the chat. Expressions like boys will be boys are so deep rooted in our society, making it so normalized, right? I think it's super dangerous because when we hear phrases like that, we don't always jump to this conclusion. We just say like, oh, that's a phrase that people say. We don't really know like the meaning behind it and like why it's harmful. Yeah, we don't always like have that kind of reaction, that visceral reaction when we hear like phrases like boys will be boys, because I don't know, people don't say that for girls, so I don't understand why people justify it. Thank you for everyone's discussion in the chat. So finally, I've explained all of this, but ultimately we need to make tangible change with our knowledge. How can we do this? The first way is to unpack your subconscious biases. Some examples of questions to ask yourself include, what types of privileges do I have and how can I use my privilege to help others? Do I feel the need to judge other girls? Has society convinced me that I need to put other girls down to empower myself? And why are these misogynistic biases harmful? How can I continue to unlearn my internalized misogyny? Why is it important to show respect for others and for myself? For me, growing up and being exposed to the media, I think I've internalized messages that upheld patriarchal narratives, and looking back, I realized that I always found myself deeming cis men as the default and as the standard of like what a person should be. And obviously I don't fit that mold. And when I was growing up and finding my confidence, I think I felt the need to judge other misogyny affected people and to constantly feel like I can't love myself without having a bad opinion of everyone else. So I think that's just what society has always like pushed onto younger girls. But as I've gotten older and like matured and found my own self-worth in myself, I have no longer felt the need to put other girls down. And I know that someone else's beauty doesn't take away from my own, and that there's no right way to be a woman. I always feel bad when I see someone who constantly spreads hate, especially like girls who put down other girls, because I now realize that it's like, so it's their own hate is a reflection of their insecurity, and in reality it has nothing to do with the other person, because as we see in like lots of examples in society, you can never win. Like for example, the beauty standard, people like are body shamed at every size, specifically like well, of course plus size people and fat people are their bodies are like marginalized, and people who have disabilities, physical disabilities, but there's no like right body type in society, and that just shows that like you can never win. So just be yourself. It doesn't matter, because society is going to try to put you down either way. And I'm really grateful that I've emotionally matured enough to recognize that internalized misogyny has definitely shaped my view of the world. So now I realize that I need to constantly reevaluate my mindset to ensure that I'm doing my best to uplift others and myself as well in the process. Speak up and start these conversations. One impactful way to create change is to engage in uncomfortable conversations. Unfortunately, incidents of sexual assault are a lot more common than you may think, and I guarantee that people in your life have experienced this. Ultimately, whether you realize it or not, this issue directly affects your life. Remember that you have the power to create a safe space for survivors within your interpersonal relationships. Thus, I encourage you to speak up in times of injustice, to educate people in your life, and to show support for sexual assault survivors. For example, every time you speak up when you hear a rape joke, you are showing people that you do not tolerate locker room talk. Your voice truly matters. And finally, social justice is always intersectional. Every social issue impacts one another, and therefore, by fighting for one cause, you have to recognize how many different marginalized groups are being affected in the process. It benefits everyone, and even cis men can reap the benefits in certain situations. Fighting rape culture benefits everyone. Certain characteristics such as sexual orientation, disability status, or ethnicity, and some contextual factors increase women's vulnerability to violence. Rape culture affects us all, regardless of gender identity, sexuality, economic status, race, religion, age, or more. Rooting it out means leaving behind restrictive definitions of gender and sexuality that limit a person's right to define and express themselves. Every day, we have the opportunity to examine our behaviors and beliefs for biases that permit rape culture to continue. So, final thoughts. Here's a summary for why is locker room talk harmful. Firstly, it reinforces the message that misogyny-affected people exist to please men and that we have to conform to their standards. It also normalizes rape culture and its slut-shaming mentality, which perpetuates the victim-blaming mindset, when in reality, it is never the victim's fault. And finally, we begin to internalize inaccurate biases and subconsciously tolerate misogynistic behavior, as we talked about before in our discussion. And yeah, thank you for listening. I'm so grateful that you all spent your Friday afternoon with Shivani and I genuinely appreciate you all very much. Here are the contacts for each of us in case you would like to follow up with any questions or concerns. Here is the Instagram handle and the email. And I wanted to ask whether we could take a group photo, but I know a lot of you have your cameras off. So do you want to just text in the chat and let me know whether you would be able to turn your camera on, or if not, it's okay. And I was just here, I'll stop screen sharing. Oh my goodness, hi everyone. Oh my goodness, I'm so happy. I just